Isabella, my mother-in-law, has a hobby of bullying her daughter-in-law. Right after I announced my pregnancy, she suddenly threw a teacup at me. The steam rising from the spilled tea told me how hot it was. Surprised? Got you with my prank. She laughed without any remorse, and I felt an anger like never before welling up inside me. If you're going to play nasty pranks, be prepared. My name is Stella. I'm 29 years old, working part-time while being a housewife. I've been married to my husband, Leo, for 4 years, and we haven't had any children yet. We want kids, but it's a gift that we can't control. We're considering visiting a clinic soon. In the meantime, I'm trying to do what I can, like adjusting our diet and making sure to get some exercise. Physical health is important, but so is mental health. Above all, stress is the enemy. Even though it's part-time, my job is pretty stressful, but quitting isn't an option when we think about our finances. Fortunately, my workplace has a lot of nice people, so I'm lucky in that regard. So, the stress from work is mild and manageable. But unfortunately, there's something incredibly stressful outside of work. That is, my mother-in-law Isabella's presence. In general, many households experience fierce mother-in-law and daughter-in-law battles. Ours is no different. On the day we announced our engagement and went to greet her, Isabella's strong personality was immediately apparent. "So, you're the witch stealing my son away?" I still remember how my pasted-on smile froze at that moment. She glared up at me. "Don't get cocky just because you're marrying Leo. Just so you know, I've known him longer and better than you ever will. Who in the world competes with their daughter-in-law over the length of time they've known their son? Of course, you've known him longer. Of course, you know Leo well, you're his mother. Wow, this woman is obsessed with her son." I was completely fed up. It's better than hating him, but being overly doting is also tough. I half expected her to say something like, "I had to give up marrying my own son because we're related by blood." And she actually said it, which really disgusted me. How could I possibly get along with her? There's no way. Moreover, Isabella doesn't want to get along with me, her daughter-in-law. It's only natural, given that Isabella's bullying is pretty intense. Though we don't live together, Isabella lives nearby and frequently visits our apartment. It's a nuisance that she comes without any notice, and as a housewife, she comes whenever she pleases, weekdays or weekends. Of course, I've never received advance notice even once. Naturally, she comes even when Leo and I are at work, and when we're not home, she leaves a lot of complaints on the voicemail. But that's not all. When we're not home, she involves the neighbors. She can't get in because of the auto lock, so she sneaks in with other residents when they enter. Isn't that a crime? But Isabella insists it's our fault for not being home. Even if she gets in, we're not there. So how does she get into the apartment? She causes a scene at the front door. "I've been locked out by my strict daughter-in-law. The key won't turn," she shouts until the neighbors come out to see what's going on. "There's a strict daughter-in-law in this house. Call the police," she tells them. Unbelievable. When the neighbor's wife told me, "Your mother-in-law," I nearly fainted. I was so embarrassed, and I felt like crying when I had to apologize to the neighbors for the trouble. Even though Leo scolded her harshly, she didn't learn her lesson. The other day, she used the same trick to get to our front door and shouted, "Does anyone know where my daughter-in-law went? She's been depressed because she can't have children. I was keeping an eye on her, but she's disappeared." It's really too much to handle. No matter how much Leo and his father David tell her, Isabella doesn't stop her harassment. Frankly, it's not just me she's harassing, it's also affecting her son, but she probably doesn't realize that. Seeing her smirk maliciously at my troubled face is really infuriating. She asked Leo for a spare key, but he refused, of course. It's amazing she thinks she could get a spare key after all the trouble she's caused. She probably thinks that if we gave her a spare key, she wouldn't cause any more trouble. But I could easily imagine how terrible things would get inside the house. Actually, I had already experienced it. When we first got married, I underestimated Isabella and gave her a spare key after she insisted I'm his mother. It was a disaster. When I came home from my part-time job, all my belongings were out in front of the door. I was shocked, and when I went inside, I was even more astonished. Pictures of Isabella and young Leo were plastered all over the walls, with photo frames everywhere. The groceries I had bought were used up, my pre-prepared meals were thrown away, and Isabella's cooking filled the refrigerator. While I stood there, stunned, Isabella declared, "A mother cooks for her son." She even said, "I'll sleep in the bedroom with my son. You, daughter-in-law, sleep on the couch or the floor in the living room." She claimed there was no space for my belongings in the house and that she would place hers instead. It was incredibly difficult to put all my things back where they belonged. Leo quickly got the spare key back from her. But she had made a copy of the spare key. When I encountered the second rearrangement of the house, I was so caught off guard that I collapsed. So, I promptly added another lock. Her obsession with her son is beyond abnormal. Her overprotectiveness is entering the realm of the creepy. Of course, Leo warns her. After being scolded by her beloved son, she pretends to reflect, only to repeat the same behavior. She doesn't learn at all. Eventually, Leo told her she'd be banned from the house, and she finally calmed down a bit. But just a bit. She stopped involving the neighbors, at least. But Isabella's bullying of her daughter-in-law continues. It's practically a hobby for her. Bullying her daughter-in-law is her life's mission, it's no joke. Once, when I came home from work, I found the mailbox stuffed with container filled with Isabella's homemade food. Please, don't force it in when there's already mail. With a sigh, I took it out and saw that it contained food I hated. She had asked me once what foods I disliked, and I had told her. It was a meticulously planned harassment. And, of course, Leo doesn't particularly like that food either. Upon closer inspection, I noticed one container was labeled for daughter-in-law and another for Leo. The one for Leo was filled with his favorite dishes. How much time does she have to make multiple side dishes just for harassment? She should find a hobby other than bullying her daughter-in-law. The other day, she left some clothes she bought from a department store. Again, the clothes were the exact opposite of my taste. Who would wear such flashy designs? Wearing something like that would draw attention in all the wrong ways. Leo would definitely say he wouldn't want to walk with me in those clothes. But Isabella left a note demanding a photo of me wearing them. The clothes remain in the closet, unworn. Of course, I have never worn them. If she really bought them at a department store, I would like to bring the salesperson here. I want to ask why they decided to carry such clothes. Anyway, my mother-in-law's bullying continues, and the stress is overwhelming. How can I hope for a child in this mental state? I sigh every day. But life is strange. When all you think about is wanting a child, it doesn't happen. When you start to shift your focus to other things, like dealing with Isabella, it suddenly happens. Is this real? One day, I stood in front of the pregnancy test, my hands shaking. The result was clearly positive. I rushed out of the bathroom and shouted, "It's positive!" Whoa, you scared me. Haven't gone for a few days? Thanks for the typical misunderstanding. But no, it's positive for pregnancy. I brushed off Leo's usual remark and thrust the test at him. Positive? Yes, positive. Positive, we're having a baby? Yes. Leo probably had strong feelings that we wouldn't be able to have a child. It took him a moment to understand my words. Finally, his mind caught up. Really? Really? Wow, amazing. Thank you, Stella. We did it. We hugged each other, tears streaming down our faces. Now that we had celebrated, the real challenge of pregnancy began. First, I reduced my part-time hours because I shouldn't overexert myself in the early stages. This meant our income decreased, but we had to dip into our savings for necessary expenses. I'll work harder. Leo's enthusiasm was a relief. I'll do the shopping, carry the bags, and Stella, you don't have to lift anything heavier than chopsticks. I'll even cook the meals, he declared. While I appreciated it, it was a bit much. To be clear, the clothes I'm wearing are already heavier than chopsticks, Leo. After I told him not to overdo it, he settled into just helping with what I asked. Thanks to that, we successfully confirmed the gestational sac and heard the heartbeat. Cheers! We celebrated as a couple. Looking at the ultrasound picture we got from the hospital, Leo and I started to discuss. This is where a problem arises. How do we announce the pregnancy to each parent's home? At my parents' home, there are already grandchildren from my brother's family, so it won't be the first grandchild, and they won't be overly excited. So, we decided to tell them in a straightforward manner. The problem is with Leo's side. It's always Leo's side, or rather, Isabella. Normally, with an ordinary mother-in-law, we'd announce it normally, but Isabella isn't ordinary. Still, we have to tell her, right? Yeah. We agreed as a couple. We also agreed that we had no choice. If it were just Isabella, we might consider keeping it quiet, but David is also involved. It would be their first grandchild, and it wouldn't be fair to keep it from him. So, we decided to visit the in-laws' home to announce the pregnancy. We considered just calling like we did with my parents, but since they live nearby, we thought it better to visit in person to avoid any fuss later. When we arrived, Isabella immediately pulled Leo inside, saying, "Oh, Leo! It's been a while. Come in." Of course, I was left alone at the entrance. I hesitated, unsure if I should just walk in, but Leo quickly came back, apologizing. "Sorry, Stella. Mom's strength is like a wrestler's, I couldn't resist." "Come in." Following Leo, David came out and greeted me with an apologetic look. "I'm sorry for Isabella, Stella. She's good at slipping past me." It seemed David had his hands full with Isabella too. In the living room, as soon as Leo and I sat on the two-seater sofa, she squeezed herself between us, saying, "I'll sit here. But this sofa is for 2 people." I quickly stood up, saying, "Ouch, don't push." "What's going on, Mom?" Leo scolded. But Isabella, unapologetic, said, "It's been so long since Leo came home. Mom wants to sit next to you." "Mom." "Isabella, you move," David said in a low, commanding voice, before Leo could say anything. David said in a low, commanding voice, before Leo could say anything. "But honey." "Move." "Okay." Without raising his voice, David's firm tone made even Isabella reluctantly comply. Finally, with the in-laws sitting in front of us, Leo announced the reason for our visit: we were having a baby. "That's wonderful news." David congratulated us with a rare, joyful smile. Seeing normally stoic and reserved David genuinely happy made me happy too. What about Isabella? We both wondered if she would be so overjoyed that she'd say, I'll raise the grandchild myself. Leo probably thought the same. We both braced ourselves for Isabella's reaction. But contrary to our expectations, Isabella remained silent, her head down. We anticipated her saying, "I'll take care of my grandchild," with a delighted face. But her reaction was unexpected. She slowly raised her head. "What?" Isabella was crying. And it was clear they weren't tears of joy. Because Isabella was glaring at me with a fierce expression. "I won't forgive you." "What?" What did she just say? I tilted my head in confusion. Then Isabella shouted, "I won't forgive you." Pregnant? With Leo's child? This woman? You've already taken Leo from me, and now you're having his child? I won't forgive you, never. Leo is mine, and if he has a child, it just means I have more enemies. I've always tried to get rid of you, so why haven't you left? Why haven't you divorced Leo? Why are you having a child? Isabella! Isabella's mouth moved incessantly, glaring at me with a hateful look. If David hadn't stopped her, she would have continued. Called by David, Isabella suddenly seemed to realize something. But until then, she had been glaring at me with a terrifying face. She really scared me. I felt true fear for the first time, seeing her like she was possessed. "Oh, I'm sorry." She apologized hurriedly. But it was too late. My fear didn't go away. I just wanted to leave quickly when she said, "I'll make some tea," and headed to the kitchen. After she left, David looked at us and apologized. "I'm sorry, both of you." "Dad, Mom's behavior is really strange." I agree. I think so too. For Isabella, raising children was her life. I also played a part in this. I wanted her to be a housewife, but as a result, I confined her to a narrow world. David said sadly. Even though we brought good news, the atmosphere had become gloomy. "Let's go home," Leo said just as Isabella returned with tea. "Oh, I've prepared some nice tea. At least have some before you go." Leo gave me a troubled look. "Tea should be fine," I said, and Leo apologized again. Honestly, I felt frustrated. Why did something that should be happy make me feel this way? It's all her fault. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. This anger wasn't from morning sickness. However, despite my anger, Isabella smiled gently as if her earlier behavior was a lie. "I'm really sorry, Stella. I said something strange because I was surprised." David answered her. "Exactly. What were you thinking?" "Yes, I'm sorry." Come to think of it, this might be the first time Isabella has ever apologized. Although she's often uncontrollable, she seemed quite normal with David around. Thinking that, I watched Isabella's hands. She poured tea from the teapot into each cup. The steam rising showed how hot it was. That's right. It's not strange at all to have a child when you're married. Exactly, Mom. I need to get it together. That's right, Isabella. I'll be a grandpa, and you'll be a grandma. Isabella smiled peacefully as if a burden had been lifted. Leo and David spoke to her, relieved. This might be the first calm moment we've had with Isabella around. Maybe things will be peaceful from now on? Maybe Isabella won't act out anymore. I thought so. "Be careful, it's hot," David said, handing me a teacup. "Don't get burned," Leo said, handing me another teacup. Am I next? I absent-mindedly watched Isabella's hands. Then, "Here you go, Stella. Make sure to take it properly," I answered. "What?" At the moment Isabella's words registered, I saw Isabella's face gleefully lifting the teacup. The next moment, the teacup came flying towards me. It was filled with scalding hot tea.
Stella, watch out!
Ah! I couldn't move from the sudden shock. I heard Leo's voice. At the same time, my vision was covered by Leo's back. I heard the splash of water, then the sound of the teacup falling. Even as I heard the teacup shatter, I couldn't move. Leo's voice,
Hot!
brought me back to reality.
Leo! It's hot, geez. Are you okay, Leo?
I'm fine. My clothes shielded me from the direct hit.
But,
Looking at the floor, steam was still rising from the spilled tea. I shuddered to think how hot it was and what would have happened if it had hit my face.
what are you doing, Isabella?
I shouted, glaring at her. But Isabella looked as stunned as I was.
Isabella, you.
David's face turned red as he confronted Isabella. Finally, as if waking up, Isabella shouted, "Oh no," and ran to the refrigerator to get some ice.
I don't need it. I'll cool it with water.
Leo said it was over his clothes, but he must have still felt the heat. He rolled up his sleeve where the tea had splashed and went to the kitchen sink to run cold water over it. As I heard the water running, I glared at Isabella.
What were you thinking, Isabella?
What do you mean?
My hand just slipped. You were definitely aiming for my face. What if it had hit me directly?
Since you're okay, it's fine, isn't it?
No, it's not. Leo could have been seriously burned.
It's your fault for not catching it properly.
What?
At first, Isabella seemed apologetic, but then she started to justify herself. What?
It was just a little prank. It's not that big of a deal. A prank.
I was speechless with shock, and Isabella, smiling, said,
I told you, my hand slipped.
Were you surprised?
Prank success.
She even made a peace sign as she laughed. I felt like I might faint from the shock. How could someone do this just to bully their daughter-in-law? Even though her own son could have been badly burned, she laughed it off, saying it was an accident. Unbelievable.
Isabella, how could you?
What? I'm not at fault. I just wanted to lighten the mood because you seemed tense. If Leo hadn't interfered, it would have just fallen on the floor.
Stella is pregnant.
So what? What, are you pretending to be all delicate because you're pregnant? Realizing it was pointless to talk to her, I walked away. I went to check on Leo, who seemed to have avoided a serious burn. He was putting his sleeve back down. But he was holding his phone, talking to someone.
Leo, are you okay?
I was worried he might have called an ambulance, thinking his injury was worse than it seemed. He smiled reassuringly. I'm fine, but I need urgent help, he said, ending the call.
Did you call an ambulance?
No, my arm is fine. I didn't call an ambulance, but I did call someone else.
Someone else?
Leo smiled at me reassuringly. Behind us, the in-laws were arguing loudly like an old married couple.
I can't take this anymore. What were you thinking?
What do you mean?
That woman is a strict daughter-in-law who took Leo away. Strict daughter-in-law? That's Isabella. Actually, she's a strict mom. Whatever the case, what Isabella did is unforgivable. What Stella did is unforgivable.
Wow, what a mess. I didn't intend to side with Isabella, of course. Even though Leo was fine, it was still dangerous for both of us. I gently placed my hand on my stomach, and Leo looked at me worriedly, asking, "Are you okay?" I smiled back, reassuring him that I was fine. However, I realized that continuing to deal with Isabella might lead to unpredictable stress. It was becoming dangerous not just mentally, but physically as well. I thought it might be best to cut off contact with her until the baby was born. Just then, the doorbell rang. Since it was an old house without an intercom, we couldn't see who it was. Isabella, seemingly relieved for the distraction, said, "Oh, someone's here?" and rushed off.
Hey, we're not done talking.
David called after her, but she ignored him. "Hello, who is it?" Isabella said, opening the door. A moment later, we heard her exclaim, "What?" Curious, Leo said, "Let's go see," and we followed him. The three of us, Leo, David, and I, went to the door, where we were met with a surprising sight.
Police, why?
I saw a stern-faced police officer standing at the entrance. Isabella, looking nervous, asked,
What is this about?"
The officer said, "We're the police. We received a report and need to speak with you."
A report?
Isabella's face turned pale. "What?" she muttered. The officer continued, "Is it true that this is a case of assault?" Isabella went completely white.
What are you talking about? Admit your guilt, Mom. I didn't do anything. Then can I use my burn as evidence? What?
Isabella stared at Leo in shock. Leo extended his arm, showing the burn from the hot tea. "Wait, he said he was fine earlier, right?" I started to worry if he had lied, but seeing Leo's expression, I understood. Ah, this is an act. Being married to Leo, I can tell when he's lying. Isabella, despite knowing Leo longer, seemed too panicked to see through it. Well, with a police officer standing in front of her, it's understandable she couldn't think straight. The police officer smiled at Leo's words.
A burn? How did that happen? My mom threw a teacup filled with hot tea at me.
As soon as Leo said that, his mother shouted,
That's a lie!
It's not a lie. The teacup is still scattered in the living room. I see, this is a case for arrest then. I'll proceed with the arrest. With that, the officer pulled out handcuffs. Wait, is it that easy to arrest someone? I wasn't the only one surprised. Isabella was even more shocked, her face twisted in fear as she confronted Leo.
Leo, are you betraying Mom? After all I've done for you, you traitor. Ungrateful child.
Isabella went hysterical, believing her beloved son had betrayed her. But Leo retorted,
You betrayed me first, Mom.
And Isabella fell silent.
Why can't you be happy that I found someone I love more than you? Why can't you be happy that I'm having a child? Why would you want me to stand by and watch as you hurt my beloved Stella, and act as if it's okay?
She had no response to her son's words.
I cared about you, Mom. I hated your harassment of Stella and wanted you to stop. I even spoke harshly to you about it. But I always thought it was because you cared about me. Now, I can't forgive you anymore. Leo! If you try to hurt my family, my wife and child, then I will cut ties with you. What?
Isabella, already pale, turned completely white at Leo's declaration of cutting ties. Her eyes widened, bloodshot, and her lips trembled.
You're joking, right, Leo? Cutting ties, that's too much. I'm not joking. I will never see you again. You won't meet your grandchild either. That's too cruel. Which part of this is cruel? You won't have to see the daughter-in-law you hate or the grandchild you tried to ruin. You won't have to see me, a son who cherishes his wife and child. No, I don't want that. Anything but that.
Isabella screamed and broke down in tears, but Leo's resolve was firm. Seeing the cold look in his eyes, Isabella realized there was no love left between them and retreated inside. "Wait, what about the arrest?" I thought, turning to the police officer, only to see him shaking hands with Leo.
"Thanks, Mark. Sorry for the trouble."
"It's nothing. Just buy me a drink next time."
"Of course.
See you later." After saying that, the police officer, or rather Mark, left.
What? What just happened?"
I stared at Leo in disbelief, and he gave me a mischievous smile. "He's my friend from middle school, Mark. Mom doesn't know my friends from back then."
"So, he's a police officer?"
"No, he's just an office worker who likes cosplay."
"Cosplay?"
Cosplay, right. The thing where you dress up as characters from manga or anime. I knew he had a police officer cosplay set from a photo he showed me before. It's nothing like a real police officer's uniform when you look closely. Now that he mentioned it, I remembered. He had worn a jacket to make it less noticeable, but the colors and design were different from the real thing.
"He's still single and lives with his parents. When I called, he was home and came right over. It's good to have friends."
Leo laughed heartily, like a child who had successfully pulled off a prank. Mom called it a prank, so prank success. Whether Isabella heard or not, she didn't come out of the back room. The true shock came not from the fake police officer, but from her son's declaration of cutting ties. After that, I never saw Isabella again. David had reached his limit with her behavior and pushed her away, leading to their divorce. With some alimony, Isabella started living alone but was reportedly in a daze, having lost her life's purpose, her son. Leo frequently received voicemails from her, begging for forgiveness, but he found it frightening and blocked her number. He seemed determined never to see her again. Still, given the gratitude for raising him, I can't say for sure that they'll never meet again. But I do know that she'll never see me or our child again. Recently, Isabella's house became known as a trash-filled mess, but that's not my concern. I guess I am a strict daughter-in-law, wishing she would just disappear. A few months later, we had a beautiful baby. We cherish and adore our child immensely. But I still can't understand the extreme obsession Isabella had. Parenting is very challenging, but it's okay. I have a husband who loves and protects his family. No matter what problems arise, we'll be fine. I believe we'll be a happy family with endless smiles. Is that cake shop really that big of a deal? I asked curiously. It seems so. Well then, it must be worth a lot of money. Megan, my mother-in-law, replied with a nasty grin spreading across her face. My husband Brian chuckled in agreement. We've got Dad's will, so now we can live it up in luxury. But doesn't Nicole have a will too? Megan questioned, raising an eyebrow. Brian scoffed, holding up a white envelope. What, this thing about leaving the cake shop to her? It's nothing, we can just toss it out of the envelope. He proceeded to rip the envelope to shreds and discard it carelessly. At that moment, something inside me snapped. I had never been legally adopted by my father-in-law, Joseph. Therefore, I had no rightful claim to his inheritance. If Megan and Brian took all of Joseph's assets for themselves, I probably would have accepted it without complaint. However, I could not tolerate them blatantly disregarding Joseph's final wishes. And on top of that, all they cared about was the money. If money was so important to them, then they should just keep treasuring it until the very end. When that money eventually ran out, maybe then they would finally realize the magnitude of what they had lost. I quietly turned my back on the two of them in the living room. My name is Nicole. This year marks my 40th birthday, a milestone age. And in my life, I find myself standing at a major crossroads. The truth is, I'm currently agonizing over whether or not to get a divorce. Brian and I got married over a decade ago. We don't have any children, but I wouldn't say our relationship is bad. However, if you asked me if I still love Brian, I'd honestly have a hard time answering. Brian doesn't cheat on me, and he's diligent in his work. It's just that he's hopelessly irresponsible when it comes to money. And whenever he's in a bind, he goes running to Joseph for help. I wish he'd stop relying on his parents like a child and act more like a grown adult. Whenever I try to scold Brian about this, Megan always jumps to his defense.
Don't you dare lecture him in that high and mighty tone.
She snaps at me condescendingly. I wonder what Brian will do once Joseph is gone. Watching Joseph lying in his hospital bed, I let out a quiet sigh. But arguing with Brian about money is nothing new. To be honest, I had sensed a difference in our attitudes towards money long before with Brian. In fact, from the very beginning when we first met, I had doubts about the way Brian spent his money. For example, there was this one time before we got married when the two of us went to a shopping mall together. In front of a luxury brand store inside the mall, Brian suddenly stopped in his tracks. "What's wrong?" I asked, curious about his sudden halt.
"Oh, it's just that there's this watch I've been wanting,"
he replied, pointing to a glass display case at the store's entrance. Inside the case sat an array of high-end watches.
"For $1,000! Isn't that a bit expensive?"
I exclaimed, my eyes widening at the exorbitant price tag. Brian scoffed, brushing off my concerns. "What are you talking about? That's practically a bargain." It was true that when it came to luxury watches, it wasn't uncommon for prices to exceed $10,000. However, at the time, we were both in our mid-20s. Not to mention, we were trying to save money in preparation for our upcoming wedding. I tried to reason with him.
"Even after we get married, we'll both still be working for a while, right? Once we start living together, we'll have more financial flexibility soon enough."
It would be easier to save money compared to when we were living alone. It was better to wait until we had the extra leeway before making such a purchase. That was how I attempted to persuade him. But Brian simply frowned, unconvinced by my argument.
"I need to buy it now, or else,"
he insisted stubbornly.
"Can't you endure just a little bit longer? Please?"
I pleaded with him. We ended up discussing it in front of the store for about 30 minutes. Finally, Brian reluctantly gave in. Needless to say, I breathed a sigh of relief. I had planned to continue working even after getting married, so I wasn't too worried about running short on living expenses even if we splurged a little. Still, it went without saying that it was better to avoid any unnecessary spending. Brian seemed to accept my way of thinking. I was convinced that with this mindset, we would manage just fine after tying the knot. However, on the day right before our wedding ceremony, we were in our new home where we would begin our life together, unpacking boxes after the move. That's when I opened a cardboard box and unexpectedly discovered an unfamiliar shopping bag inside. "This is Brian's?" I asked, holding up the mysterious bag.
"Yeah, that's right. Could you take it to the bedroom for me? I'm going to install the fridge,"
Brian replied nonchalantly. "Got it," I agreed, carrying the bag towards Brian's study. However, as I walked, a strange uneasiness settled in my chest.
"Wait, was that a luxury brand?"
I muttered to myself, the image from earlier flashing through my mind. The shopping bag had the logo of a famous international brand printed on it. Of course, I wouldn't get angry at Brian for owning luxury items. If anything, since Brian worked in sales at a trading company, I wanted him to maintain a neat appearance. But for some reason, it bothered me this time. So, feeling guilty, I decided to check the contents of the bag.
Ah. This is.
I gasped as I pulled out a high-end wristwatch from inside. It was the same one we had seen at the shopping mall. I immediately confronted Brian about it. Flustered, Brian started making excuses.
My boss told me to wear a nice watch, so I had no choice but to buy it,
he claimed, avoiding eye contact.
Then why didn't you discuss it with me first?
I demanded, my brows furrowing.
Well, it's a work thing, so.
He trailed off weakly. He didn't think it was something he needed to consult me about. He knew it was wrong of him to buy it without telling me. Brian spouted off these flimsy justifications. Naturally, I was furious. But there was no point in complaining about it now. In the end, I simply said,
next time, talk to me about it first.
And left it at that. However, even after that incident, Brian continued to make big purchases without my knowledge. If he kept that up, I should have noticed at some point. But I never did. Because Brian's methods were clever and deceptive. What shocked me the most was discovering that Brian had been receiving an allowance from Joseph. Whenever he ran out of money, he would ask Joseph to spot him some cash. It goes without saying that a grown adult shouldn't be doing that. If I had known, I would have put a stop to it. But I only found out about it much, much later. A year ago, when Joseph was hospitalized for an illness, I learned of it while talking to him on his sickbed. Come to think of it, when Brian heard about Joseph's hospitalization, he seemed quite distraught.
What? Dad's in the hospital,
Brian exclaimed loudly as he spoke on the phone with Megan. Joseph's been hospitalized? I asked Brian, and he nodded at me while still talking to Megan.
So, how's his condition?
I inquired, unable to hear the other side of the conversation but sensing the severity of the situation. Eventually, Brian ended the call and turned to face me. Hesitantly, he said,
I'm sorry, but I think I should go back to my parents' place.
You're right. That's probably for the best. I agreed, understanding his concern. No, that's not what I meant. I want to live with my mom at their house. He clarified, his words catching me off guard. Certainly, with Joseph's absence, I was worried about Megan. However, the idea of moving in with my in-laws seemed like too sudden of a development. As I silently pondered what to do, Brian began explaining his reasons for wanting to live together. Brian was the only child of his parents, so if things continued like this, Megan would end up alone. Additionally, Joseph ran a cake shop, and even while hospitalized, there would be a need to communicate with the store. But Megan had very little work experience, and it was doubtful that she could properly assist with the business. Therefore, it would be better for either Brian or me to lend a helping hand. Brian shared all of these thoughts with me.
But what about work?
I asked, knowing that if we both moved in with his parents, we would have no choice but to quit our jobs. That wouldn't solve the problem at hand. Just as I was thinking this, Brian continued with a smile. It's okay. I'll put in a request for a transfer, he assured me.
A transfer?
Yeah, my company has a branch office near my parents' house, he explained. The trading company Brian worked for had several branch offices throughout the country. Apparently, one of them was located close to his parents' home. If he transferred there, he wouldn't have to quit his job. Brian shared this information with me.
But it's impossible for me,
I pointed out. Right. Your company is. He trailed off, realizing the predicament. My company only had the headquarters where I currently worked. His parents' house was too far away for me to commute. That being said, Joseph had always been kind to me from the moment we first met. I wanted to repay his kindness before it was too late, and I regretted not doing so. After much contemplation, I made the decision to quit my job. Brian, on the other hand, submitted a transfer request to his company. Fortunately, his transfer to the branch office near his parents' house was approved. Meanwhile, I left my job and began helping out Joseph. That's when Joseph said something unexpected to me. "Nicole, if you're interested, how about becoming an employee at our company?"
What? Me?
I asked, taken aback by his offer.
Yeah, it wouldn't be right to have you work without pay. If you become an employee, I can give you a salary.
He explained with a warm smile. It was an offer too good to pass up. I immediately accepted his proposal. Subsequently, I was hired as a mid-career employee at Joseph's cake shop. Megan wasn't too thrilled about the idea, but when I told her I would take care of Joseph, she reluctantly nodded in agreement. And so, I embarked on a new beginning at Joseph's cake shop. Once I started working there, I realized it was an even better workplace than I had imagined. There were talented pastry chefs and many kind-hearted individuals. The cake shop is such a wonderful place. Why didn't you take over the business, Brian? I asked him shortly after I began working there. Logically, Brian should have been the successor. However, he had chosen to work for a trading company instead. Apparently, he had no intention of inheriting the cake shop. It was something we had discussed before getting married, but actually working there made me wonder why he didn't want to take over the store. The cake shop isn't cool at all. It doesn't seem to make much money either, Brian remarked nonchalantly.
What? Not cool? Not profitable?
I couldn't believe what I was hearing.
Yeah, I've been to the store a few times, but there are hardly any customers.
He continued, but I couldn't process the rest of his words. In essence, his reasons seemed to be that the shop wasn't stylish enough and didn't appear to be lucrative. I couldn't believe he thought of Joseph's work in such a way. I felt my affection for Brian instantly grow cold. This incident occurred about a year ago. Since then, while discussing work with Joseph, I learned that he had been giving money to Brian. However, Joseph added that it was an old story. When I asked him how long ago it was, Joseph simply laughed.
It hasn't happened in the past few years. He probably wanted to impress you since you had just gotten married,
Joseph explained with a knowing smile. It seemed that Brian had told Joseph he bought the luxury items to show off to me. Although the stories didn't quite match up, I didn't say anything to avoid burdening Joseph. Some time later, Joseph's condition took a sudden turn for the worse. Gradually, it became difficult for him to even hold a conversation. Amidst all of this, Joseph made a certain request of me.
So, could I ask you to do that for me?
He inquired, his voice weak but hopeful.
I don't mind at all, but are you sure?
I asked, wanting to confirm his intentions.
Yeah. Recently, I've started to understand a lot of things just by the atmosphere,
Joseph replied, chuckling contentedly. That was the last proper conversation I had with Joseph. A few days later, he lost the ability to speak. I told Megan and Brian that I wanted them to come visit Joseph.
What? Visit him? I'm too busy for that.
Megan dismissed the idea coldly. I couldn't fathom what she could be so busy with. In any case, Megan refused to visit Joseph. Brian also claimed he couldn't go see Joseph because of work.
Don't say that. This might be the last chance,
I pleaded, my heart sinking.
I know, but it's for work,
Brian responded with a casual attitude. I was utterly furious. In a situation like this, I could understand why Joseph had made that request to me. I had completely lost patience with Brian. This was something I needed to consider divorce over. I began contemplating the idea of leaving Brian. Around that time, Joseph passed away. My mind went blank. There were still so many things I wanted to discuss with Joseph. I couldn't let it end like this. Pushing my emotions aside, I started preparing for Joseph's funeral. David, one of Joseph's subordinates and a talented pastry chef from the cake shop, came to help. However, for some reason, David and Megan started arguing.
What? Why would you make it so extravagant?
Megan scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain.
Well, many people from the shop and other related parties will be attending.
David tried to explain patiently.
Just keep it simple. The shop isn't paying for the funeral expenses, are they?
Megan snapped back. It seemed they were clashing over the scale of the funeral. Megan wanted to keep it modest to reduce costs. On the other hand, David insisted that they should make it a larger event considering the number of attendees.
There are other expenses to worry about, and it's already a burden. Surely you understand that much?
Megan argued, her frustration mounting.
I do understand, but we're expecting a large turnout.
David countered, standing his ground.
What? But that's not what we had in mind.
Megan started, but I couldn't see the conversation going anywhere productive. Left with no choice, I intervened.
Megan, let me handle the funeral arrangements. Why don't you go rest over there?
I suggested, trying to defuse the situation.
What? You're treating me like I'm in the way.
Megan bristled, clearly offended.
You've been by Joseph's side for many years.
I began, attempting to reason with her. It was only natural for her to feel devastated. It would be best for her to take a break now. I tried to persuade Megan in this manner. In response, Megan turned to me with an irritated expression and declared,
Do whatever you want. But I'm not paying a cent more than what I've already prepared. I'll cover any shortfall.
I reassured her, hoping to ease the tension. Megan simply snorted in response. Brian, who was standing next to her, tried to calm Megan down while addressing me. Sorry, but can I leave that side of things to you? I'll take care of Mom. It was more convenient for me that way as well. With that in mind, I entrusted Megan to Brian's care. From then on, David and I proceeded with the funeral preparations. Thanks to our efforts, we were able to hold a dignified funeral ceremony. However, the decision to make the funeral a larger affair ended up backfiring. In addition to those related to the cake shop, many other people attended the funeral. Among them were individuals from local businesses and even politicians. Megan and Brian were taken aback by the sight of the attendees. As the funeral drew to a close, Brian approached me with a question. Hey, was Dad actually famous or something? He asked, his brows furrowed in confusion.
Joseph was beloved by many people. And of course, the cake shop is well known too.
I explained, a sad smile on my lips. I see. I had no idea. Brian murmured, his shoulders slumping slightly. He seemed a bit dejected. Perhaps he had finally realized his father's greatness. If he truly felt that way, maybe I wouldn't need to go through with the divorce after all. With these thoughts swirling in my mind, I mourned the loss of Joseph. The day after the funeral, I headed to the cake shop to retrieve Joseph's belongings. At home, Megan and Brian were busy cleaning up after the funeral. When I returned, I would need to help out as well. Thinking this, I hurried back home. I'm back. I called out as I entered the house. But there was no response. Wondering what was going on, I made my way to the living room. That's when I overheard Megan and Brian's conversation coming from the room. There were some famous people among the attendees, weren't there? Megan remarked, a hint of surprise in her voice. Yeah, I was shocked to see the department head of one of our major client companies there. Brian replied with a sigh. Meanwhile, Megan continued with a frown. Could it be that the cake shop is actually a big deal? It seems so. Brian agreed, nodding his head. Well then, it must be worth a lot of money. Megan said, a nasty grin spreading across her face. Brian responded with a smile of his own. We've already got Dad's will, so we can live a life of luxury from now on. He declared, a gleam in his eye. But doesn't Nicole have a will too? Megan asked, raising an eyebrow. What, this will about leaving the cake shop to her? This thing, we can just toss it out of the envelope. Brian scoffed, ripping the white envelope he held in his hands and discarding it. In that instant, something inside me snapped. I had never been legally adopted by Joseph. Therefore, I had no rightful claim to his inheritance. If Megan and Brian took all of Joseph's assets for themselves, I probably would have accepted it without complaint. However, I could not tolerate them blatantly disregarding Joseph's final wishes. And on top of that, all they cared about was the money. If money was so important to them, then they should just keep treasuring it until the very end. When that money eventually ran out, maybe then they would finally realize the magnitude of what they had lost. I quietly turned my back on the two of them in the living room. I headed straight to my own room. Making sure not to alert Megan and Brian, I discreetly gathered my belongings. Well, I only packed a few days' worth of clothes into a bag. Then, I placed the pre-filled divorce application and a memo that I had prepared a while ago on the table. This is goodbye, I whispered softly before quietly leaving the house. I made my way directly to a nearby cafe. There, I searched for a short-term apartment rental in the area. Luckily, I found a vacant room just a 10-minute drive away. Judging from what Megan and Brian had discussed, I might have to quit working at the cake shop. Even so, thanks to Joseph, I had some savings. I wouldn't have to worry about making ends meet for the time being. Moreover, the room I found was available for immediate move-in. So, I signed the lease on the spot. The following day, I moved into the apartment I had rented. First, I needed to get Brian to agree to the divorce. My revenge on the two of them would come later. Plus, I had to carry out what Joseph had entrusted me with. Joseph, leave it to me, I murmured, steeling my resolve. I was contemplating the timing of when to go retrieve the rest of my belongings, when I suddenly noticed several missed calls on my smartphone. There were about 30 calls in total from Megan and Brian. The calls were concentrated within the past few hours. I guess they had finally realized I was gone. As I pondered this, my smartphone abruptly started ringing. Hello? I answered the call, my voice cautious.
Ah, finally, you picked up. Where are you, Nicole?
Brian's loud voice made me wince instinctively. He continued firing off questions without pause.
You didn't come home last night, did you? Where are you and what are you doing?
It doesn't matter where I am or what I'm doing. We're getting a divorce, after all, I replied curtly.
What? A divorce?
Brian sounded genuinely shocked. That's right. I left a memo saying I wanted a divorce, remember? I placed it on the table along with the divorce application. I explained, my tone matter of fact. I could hear the sound of him rushing around on the other end of the line. Before long, Brian's high-pitched voice rang out in disbelief.
What the hell is this?
It's exactly what it looks like. I've had enough of you only caring about money, I stated bluntly.
I'm not. It's not like that.
Brian stammered, trying to make excuses. However, he was mumbling and I couldn't quite make out his words.
What? You can't say it clearly because you're feeling guilty?
I pressed, my patience wearing thin.
No. What about you, huh?
He retorted, his voice growing defensive.
What about me?
I shot back, my brows furrowing. Brian's breathing grew heavier as he continued accusingly.
You're saying all this, but you actually went to your lover's place, didn't you?
Huh? What are you talking about? I asked incredulously.
It has to be true. You suddenly left the house, and normally there's nowhere else for you to go.
Brian's voice rose in anger. I sighed heavily before responding.
Sorry to disappoint, but I'm actually at a short-term apartment rental right now. I can't believe this. When you came here, you quit your job, so you shouldn't have any money.
He exclaimed in disbelief.
I was helping out at Joseph's cake shop.
I countered, my frustration mounting. Both Brian and Megan were well aware that I had been assisting at Joseph's cake shop. In fact, it felt more like they had dumped the responsibility on me. Moreover, Megan had even made me take care of Joseph's nursing needs.
What? Were you getting an allowance from Dad or something?
Brian asked snidely. That was you, not me. I nearly blurted out those words in a burst of sarcasm. But now was not the time for such quips. I took a deep breath before continuing.
I was hired as an employee there. What did you say? You've got to be kidding me.
Brian scoffed, his tone dripping with skepticism.
It's not a joke. Joseph was kind enough to look out for me.
I asserted, my voice growing firm. Joseph had mentioned how he couldn't bear to burden his son's wife on top of being neglected by his own wife and biological son. In any case, Brian should have been able to understand that I had my own money now. Brian seemed to have lost his ability to persuade me the moment he realized I had my own money. As if to add insult to injury, I spoke with increased intensity.
Anyway, I want to divorce you, Brian. Are you going to sign the divorce papers or not? Which is it? No, this whole divorce thing.
He trailed off, his resistance weakening.
I'm not going to listen to anything you have to say unless you agree to sign the divorce papers.
I declared firmly, leaving no room for argument. Brian let out a frustrated sigh before muttering something under his breath. Then, he raised his voice louder than before.
Fine. I'll give you the divorce.
I just recorded you saying that. I informed him, a hint of triumph in my tone.
I'll sign the damn divorce papers, so just come back home. We can't move forward with the inheritance discussions without you here.
Brian finally blurted out his true intentions. However, there was one thing Brian had failed to realize. By saying that, he had inadvertently revealed the existence of a will from Joseph addressed to me. I'll say it again, but I'm not Joseph's biological daughter. Therefore, I'm not an heir to his estate. In other words, if the only purpose was to discuss the inheritance, there was absolutely no need for me to be present. Rather, the fact that they couldn't proceed without me implied that I was somehow involved in the inheritance process. He really is an idiot. I let out a quiet sigh. In any case, I had obtained proof that he would agree to the divorce. Moreover, Brian had no idea what consequences he would face. At best, he would come to regret his own words. A slight smile played on my lips at the thought. The following day, I visited my in-laws' house to retrieve the divorce application. Inside, I found Megan, Brian, and an unfamiliar man in a suit. According to Brian, the man was a lawyer. Apparently, they had called him over to discuss the inheritance matters.
"If we're going to talk about the divorce, this is perfect timing,"
Brian remarked, a smug expression on his face. I had intended to hire my own lawyer. But in a way, this worked out conveniently.
"Well then, would you mind handling my divorce case as well, while you're at it?"
I asked the lawyer, my tone polite but firm.
"Yes, that won't be a problem."
The lawyer nodded with a smile. And so, the discussion about Joseph's inheritance began. Joseph's estate consisted of cash, securities, a house, and land. However, it seemed that Megan and Brian were the only heirs. If that were the case, there would be no need for further discussion. Normally, that would be true, but Megan and Brian had been entrusted with a will from Joseph addressed to me. That matter was likely the reason they had called the lawyer. Did they really want to pretend that the will meant for me didn't exist? I had my doubts, but the lawyer proceeded with the conversation matter-of-factly without saying a word.
"So, I understand that you have a will in your possession,"
he prompted, his gaze expectant.
Yes. Here it is,"
Brian replied, placing 2 envelopes on the table. One had Megan's name on it, and the other had Brian's. The will addressed to me, which they had mentioned in that earlier conversation, was nowhere to be seen. It was to be expected, but I couldn't help feeling bitterly frustrated.
"Have you seen the contents?"
The lawyer inquired, turning the envelopes over in his hands.
"Well, the seals weren't intact, so..."
Brian trailed off, his expression slightly guilty.
"I see. Let me verify the contents then,"
the lawyer stated, proceeding to open the envelope addressed to Megan first. Inside was a single slip of paper.
"To you, I bequeath the house and land,"
it read, without specifying to whom it was addressed. However, Joseph's signature was clearly present. Similarly, the envelope addressed to Brian contained the same type of note. This one mentioned leaving the cash and securities to him, and it also bore Joseph's signature.
"Oh, there's one more sheet here,"
the lawyer remarked, noticing an additional document. It stated the following:
"Entrusting the cake shop to..."
He read aloud, his brow furrowing slightly.
"Yes. My father ran a cake shop,"
Brian explained, his tone casual.
"So, you will be inheriting the shop." "I see. Since there are also securities involved, that should work out nicely,"
the lawyer commented, nodding in understanding. The lawyer was taking notes while talking. At that moment, Brian shot me a nasty look. Oh, how could he be so clueless? I had overheard their conversation. So I knew that this will was originally intended for me. But Brian didn't know I had heard them, so he just had to sit tight. If he did anything unnecessary, he would only make me suspicious. He couldn't hide his feeling of triumph. I sighed quietly to myself. For now, I pretended not to know anything and kept the conversation going. In the end, the inheritance was divided as per the will, and both of them inherited all of Joseph's assets. Also, Brian seemed quite inflated with pride because he got the inheritance as he had hoped. He easily agreed to the alimony I proposed for the divorce. Furthermore, he signed the divorce papers right there. Here, is this good enough?
"Yes, it is."
After the lawyer confirmed everything, I nodded deeply. Then, after the lawyer left, I said goodbye to Megan and Brian.
"Well, thank you for everything all these years." "Well, we only lived together for about a year, but the marriage lasted a long time, didn't it?"
Megan said with a nasty smile. She was probably very happy to finally kick me out.
"Yes, over 10 years.
So, what are you going to do now?"
"Yes, I'll continue working. I have a lot to do."
As soon as I said that, Megan looked surprised. Then, she laughed and said to me, "Didn't you hear? Brian inherited the sweets shop." "Yes, I know." "What do you mean, yes, I know? Are you planning to keep working there even after the divorce? Isn't that a bit shameless?" Megan sneered. I replied firmly, "It's okay. My job isn't there." "What? Not there?" Joseph also ran a confectionery company. Megan and Brian were surprised by my words. Actually, Joseph had run two businesses. One was the old sweets shop that Megan and Brian knew. And the other was a confectionery company, a factory that produced sweets. It had a big factory in the area with a considerable number of employees. Moreover, recently, Joseph had been focusing on the confectionery company, and David was mainly running the sweets shop. I was hired by the confectionery company. So, even if Brian inherited the sweets shop, it didn't matter to me. When I told them this, Brian's face turned red, and he started shouting, "What the hell? That's mine too." "Sorry, but it's not." "Why not?" "Because I got the shares of the confectionery company. It was a little before Joseph passed away. He asked me to do something. That was to manage his confectionery company. A few years ago, Joseph considered mechanizing the sweets shop. He thought about introducing some machines into the production process and keeping the shop running as it was. But David advised him that if he was going to partially mechanize, it would be better to develop new products that could be fully machine-produced. So, Joseph started another confectionery company. He separated the machine-producible products from the others, creating different products for the confectionery company and the shop. This strategy turned out to be a huge hit. The confectionery company grew rapidly. Meanwhile, Joseph also focused on developing collaboration products, drawing attention to the traditional sweets shop. As a result, Joseph's businesses became highly regarded in the local community. But you two didn't care at all. That's why Joseph left it to me. Why you? Megan started to get red-faced with anger. If you had visited Joseph in the hospital, maybe you would have left the company to you. Seeing Megan biting her lip in frustration made me smile a little. This was Joseph's revenge. As I thought about that, Brian suddenly approached me. "Hey, Nicole. Let's get back together." "What? Why?" "Dad collaborated with the sweets shop, didn't he? So, we should work together as a couple again. It would be better for us to cooperate as a married couple." Joseph would have wanted that too. Brian rambled on like that. But it was far too convenient now. "No way. The divorce is settled. There's no going back." "But, Dad, oh, wait, look at this. Look at this." Brian grabbed the will from earlier. Then, showing it to me, he continued. "This will that says to leave the sweets shop to you was actually meant for you." I never expected him to confess to forging the will himself. I was amazed at how pathetic Brian looked. When I couldn't say anything, Brian spoke up. "See? It's a good deal, Nicole. I'll make you an executive, no, the president of the sweets shop. Do you even understand what you're saying? Forging a will is a crime. In this case, is it forgery or alteration? I'm not sure what specific crime it falls under. But just hiding a will is a crime in itself. In any case, what Megan and Brian did is illegal." Megan seemed to understand this and was just silently troubled on her own. On the other hand, Brian didn't care at all. He desperately tried to convince me that he wasn't in the wrong. "I didn't exactly fake it. The will didn't have a name written on it." "Then it's not clear if it was meant for me either." "No, it was in an envelope with your name on it, and..." I saw Brian tear up that envelope, so I believe his actions count as destroying the will. Even for that alone, Brian should be disqualified from inheritance. At least that's what I think. But explaining this to Brian wouldn't make him understand. So, I decided to explain it in a way he could grasp. I pulled out a copy of a certain document from my bag. Placing it in front of Brian and Megan, I declared, "This is a copy of Joseph's real will."
What? The real will?
Actually, Joseph had entrusted his will to me. It's a formal document, complete with dates and signatures. And it has the names properly addressed. However, as long as there are no contradictions with the newer will, the older one can still be valid. The only contradiction with the will I have is about the sweets shop. In my will, it's written like this: "The sweets shop is bequeathed to David." I'll contact the lawyer from earlier about this.
What? Then why did Dad leave this one?
Brian clutched the supposed will intended for me. I sighed and explained the truth to him. That's not the sweets shop, but our company. If Brian had visited Joseph in the hospital, Joseph would have told him the truth. He would know that Joseph owned both the sweets shop and the confectionery company and was now focusing on the confectionery company. If he understood that, he could have figured out whether he was to be entrusted with the sweets shop or our company. He could have known what Joseph wanted to ask of him and could have advised Joseph right there. But in the end, neither of them visited Joseph. Naturally, Joseph gave up on them at some point. And before he passed, he transferred the confectionery company shares to me.
Paying the taxes will be tough, but I'll do my best for Joseph. Wait a minute. So, I get nothing? That's right, you both might be disqualified from the inheritance.
I responded with a smile. I didn't mind at all. Besides, Joseph had already outlined what to do if they couldn't inherit.
Wait, does that mean we won't get the house or land either?
Megan asked, trembling. I answered with a smile.
Exactly. The house, land, and all the cash are to be donated. No way!
Megan collapsed in tears on the spot. Brian was already in a state of shock. He couldn't say anything, just let out a dry laugh. Ignoring them, I called the lawyer. After that, I informed the lawyer about the other will. I also reported that Megan and Brian tried to take my share of the will. I don't know what happened next. I left everything to the lawyer. All I know is that David inherited the sweets shop. And from what the lawyer told me, the house, land, and cash were all donated. Apparently, Brian ran out of money and said he couldn't pay me the alimony. So, it seems certain. In the end, Brian took a part-time job to pay the alimony. When I asked about his job, he said he quit, thinking he'd get the sweets shop. I was truly astounded by him. Why did I marry such a man? I don't understand now. Anyway, I'm glad I got divorced. Megan and Brian are now working part-time at the local factory. Meanwhile, I'm busy with the confectionery company. I can't take Joseph's company lightly. I work seriously every day. But even in my busy days, there's joy.
Yeah. Today's batch is good.
I taste a freshly made cookie from the factory. A gentle sweetness spreads in my mouth. It's an old-fashioned cookie.
Joseph, I'll protect this flavor.
I thought I'd visit Joseph's grave on my next day off. Just then, the cookie bag fell off the desk. It felt like a breeze blew through the closed office.